let's get started. So first things first, if you have any questions, just type them in the chat window, and we'll we'll integrate those in as we go along. And I would prefer that you ask questions randomly because that's way more interesting for me, and it'll be more interesting for you. There was a question kind of from last time that somebody emailed me, and they said, "What happens when your drawing gets messy?" I'm going to kind of show you what a messy drawing might look like. My sketchbook, like something like this gets pretty messy. Bunch of line work, can't really see what's going on. Looks terrible. So to prevent that in the first place, there's two tools you could potentially use. The any brand of marker is fine, but a 10% cool gray marker is amazing. So when you're sketching out, when you do your sketch and lay-in, you just get your 10% marker out, if it'll open, and let's say you're sketching heads or something. You do your head sketch, and you can do all of your like major work with this, and you can go as much as you want with this sort of 10% thing. And the funny thing about it is that it starts out kind of dark, and then as it dries, it gets a little softer. So that way, by the time it dries, you're able to just go on top of it with whatever medium that you want, and it doesn't really matter. It just sort of disappears. And I'll show you kind of what that does. So if you're having trouble, and this is a really common problem, like everybody goes through this, of like this idea of having, just terribly messy drawings. So if you have that problem, it's totally normal. Don't worry about it. This is the solution. And I like the marker because it dries, and then it won't remix with everything, especially these alcohol-based markers. You can also do the same thing with the 10% cool gray pencil, and it looks, the pencil I think looks more defined, I guess. It's can be easier to work with sometimes, but that's another option. Problem with the pencil is that it will mix slightly if you go on top with pencil. If you go on top with pen, it's not an issue. But here I have my sketch. It's now basically dry, so I can then go in with the pencil and just sort of start to define everything that I laid out. And I can be pretty confident that that's going to be okay when I do this sketch, because I kind of know where everything is now. The search is kind of over. I call it like the search phase, basically, this initial phase of kind of sketching things out. And if you do the search phase with something like that, it's just safer, I guess, is what it is, what I think. And I think you'll probably like it if you have trouble with that. So I'll write down what kind of marker this is. It is a 10% cool gray. Like, I have a Copic, but the brand doesn't really matter. Yeah, another off-topic question. How do you make landscapes look vast? That's a really good question. And I can answer that really quickly. Basically, that's kind of a distance thing. Every landscape, you sketch it out, and you put the horizon in, and then if you put a lot of foreground objects in, it's not going to look big. So the thing about landscapes is you put big objects in the back. So if you put mountains in the back and they're really small, that makes your landscape automatically look vast. Now, if your mountains are like this big, that makes your landscape come forward. So it's basically a scale thing. You see what I mean? So like this looks close up. These mountains look far away, right? So let's get to figure drawing. The first thing about figure drawing that you need is some kind of proportional system. And for my take, all the proportional systems kind of suck. I don't like any of them. But you have to use something. The standard is the 8-head proportional system. And I like to draw on big paper, so to make it easy for me, I just get a ruler out and mark out my 8 heads. And I don't mark every single one, but I'll kind of show you how that works. So this is like an ideal thing. And so the first stage in figure drawing is to do generic. And I think that's what you want to go for. You want good generic in the beginning. You don't want it to look like a portrait or a specific person. The first goal is just to get it to look human. And I think that's, a lot of people try to juggle with characters first or something like that, but I think it's better just to start simple. And my take on it is that if you can't draw something, simplify it down. So your first division up here, I made them 1 inch. You could do them with centimeters, it doesn't matter. But basically, the basic idea is that you have the top of the head here and the heel here. The midpoint is the pubic bone. Or the bottom of the underpants. And then this is one head division right here. And this one gets a little fuzzy because it's somewhere in the middle of the rib cage. And then down here, that's somewhere in the middle of the torso. And that's why all the proportional systems are kind of terrible, because they hit some landmarks, but not all of them. And I'm not necessarily a fan of any of them because they're not super objective. The main ones, I think, are the heel, the pubic bone, the top of the head, and the head. If you can get those kind of right, you can allow for a lot of variance from model to model. So the first thing is the head. Any shape that you want to use for the head to start out is fine. So a lot of people use this sort of eggy shape. Another good one is the 3-sided head. So you do an arc, and another arc. And in the reference that I'm using right now, the model is kind of looking this way. So this is kind of better and more accurate immediately. But if this is too complicated to do the 3-sided head, just use this one. The next thing that I would like to put in, because the landmark is there already, is the hip box. And I just use, I've been using an underpants shape. And it's kind of silly and kind of dumb, but it works for me. So this model is kind of turned, so I just do underpants. And the underpants shape is super simple, it's super easy. I draw it flat first and then make it dimensional. And then I come up and then I'll draw the rib cage. I'll start it like that, this kind of like bloop thing. And that bloop thing I use in landscapes for rocks and for trees. And you can use it to block in people too. And then I'll convert that to like more of a like a Star Trek communicator kind of thing. this little kind of swoosh. So this shape I find really useful because that divides up the rib cage really simply. I don't have to worry about it being like perfect or accurate or great. The other thing I want to establish is just kind of a center line. I can put a little dot where the pit of the neck goes. It's about like a half head down, maybe 3/4 of a head depending on the person. And then I'll put in a center line. I want that to kind of come down to there. And then one of the things that about a figure is that it has to be balanced. So if you drive a ramrod through the head through a standing figure, that center of balance is always going to hit down either between the legs if their weight is divided or right on one foot. So my next thing is to kind of establish roughly where that foot is going to go, and I want it to go right down under that head, because this right here establishes the entirety of what's going on with the figure. So next I'm going to block in some shapes, and I like using simple shapes, right? So I've been thinking of it as like either the lipstick or the skyscraper for the leg. So for the leg, if you put a leg on there, it's kind of like a skyscraper shape, or like a lipstick tube. You put two legs in, and you get two little skyscraper shapes next to each other. And then for the lower part of the leg, I've been thinking of it as kind of like a diamond shape. Asymmetrical, right? Because one muscle is higher than the other on the outer contour. And depending on how you turn it, like if this leg is kind of turned out, it can look more like that. So I find that if I don't use something simple, I make a lot of mistakes and I do some wrong stuff. When I do stuff that's simple, I tend to get the proportions better. And without that simplicity, I just run into a lot of problems. So I would imagine that's the case for everybody else too. If you're not using something simple, then the chances of drifting off and doing something not quite right are probably pretty good. So this leg in the model is going back. I can't really see the skyscraper, but I'm just going to draw through it very faintly, just so I know for sure that this is all in proportion, and then I can draw that foot over there. So another thing that I would recommend, a big problem that people have, is avoiding hands, feet, and faces. So even if you put a wrong line in there, it's better to put something there. Then I can kind of use a basic clavicle to figure out where the arm is, and I can run that down. And I just make an estimation. The hands sort of end somewhere around the middle of the leg, or the upper leg. So I'm just kind of putting a target down for where I think this stuff might go. I can develop those more later when I figure out exactly how big the torso is. What I like to do for the torso, especially if it's turned, is it just comes down to boxes, right? So if you look at a box straight on, it's just kind of one-dimensional and flat, right? If I turn that box, I can draw that corner, and I can show two sides, and it gets pretty dimensional. Now, I can also do a three-sided box, so I can take this side, and I can look down on the box a little bit. The other fun thing that I can do is I can take this box and I can bend it. So I can use an arc to express what's going on with that box. So I can come over here and I can do arc, bend, bend, arc, top, arc, and bottom. So if I just sort of put a head on here, little face, I can kind of create like a little mini robot character. Are the proportion of the underpants, are they one head? No, I don't think so. Well, yeah, probably if you include the iliac crest. The underpants basically anatomically the point of it right here and right here hits the front part of the bone that sticks out, and you'll see that on everybody, even if someone's really heavy. And then the iliac crest kind of goes up. So probably the total part of the hip box coming around like that is probably a whole head, but I don't necessarily draw the iliac crest all the time because you can't necessarily see that on everybody, and it gets covered up by muscle with most people, because you know that the bone point hits here and here, say, and then it comes down. The pubic bone is right here, and then the actual crest of the iliac crest comes up right here and then down, and then the spine connects back here, right? And then the legs connect in here. Okay, so that's actually a really good question, and there's so much variability person to person for how these connect. Then that you just kind of have to look and observe closely. So the main problem that I find when people do figure drawings is I break it down into this Hexagon Box problem. So most people, and I'm sure that you've done this because I did it too, when you draw a figure, you draw this sort of thing. So if you draw a head, you go around and you draw the outer contour of the head and the far side of the nose, right? And you draw in a feature, and you draw in an eye, with an eyebrow. You draw in the hair and the outline of the hair and the outline of the ear and the outline of the neck, if you even put a neck in there. A lot of people don't. And you focus on the features. And so what that kind of gets you is this sort of flat-looking head shape thing. And to me, that's equivalent to drawing the outer contour of a box without drawing the corners. As soon as I draw a head and I come in there and I do this, or I take my hexagon and I do that and I show 3 sides, I have a lot more dimension. So if I go back to this head, this corner right here that I've kind of generically made up on this head is equivalent to doing this and to emphasizing this box. The other thing too with the nose is if I just draw this part of the nose, that looks flat. If I draw this part of the nose, that looks dimensional. And then if I go ahead and close off that shape and make it so this nose is boxy, I know exactly where the light is going to go if the figure is getting lit from this side, right? And that's the cool thing about drawing in the corner, is when you know where the corner is, you know where the light turns. And you can start to make up lighting for yourself. Okay. Yeah. So total lines in the head marks, there's I use 8 inches. So this is 1. This is the head. Then I come down and do a mark at the pubic bone. Then 1 for the knee. 1 for right there, and then another mark kind of in the middle. So I know where all these things are. I skip this one, and this one. So I put 1 at like the bottom. So I have the bottom half, and then half of the bottom half. Then on the top, I do half of the top half, and then half of the top half of the top half. So it's like, it's kind of subdivided like this. So you got a half and a half, right? Excuse me. 1 half. And then I divide that and that again. 1 half and 1 half. Then I divide that again. 1 half. And then I divide that half again. So it's like a quarter and a quarter, right? So I do this little proportional system. That helps me, especially with standing figures. Other people use other kind of things. When I was in practice a lot, all I would do is the top, middle, and bottom, because then I could just take my pencil and just go boom, boom, and I kind of knew where everything was. So the quick way of doing this is just to go, top, middle, measure it out, boom, bottom. Then if you're confident that you can subdivide in your head and use target points and stuff, you just go boom, boom, right? So there's always like shortened versions of this that you're going to wind up using. Yeah, emphasize the original marks. So we're going to do this again, just to keep going with it. Hang on a second. So I'll make another proportional mark grid here so you can see how that gets developed. Okay, so that's all I use. So I'm going to use the sophisticated head shape for the head. So I'm going to go arc, because this guy's looking down and to the left, and then arc. So what I've done there is I've defined the front of the head, the jawline, and the top of the head. Okay, and these are always going to be wrong. No matter what you do, your initial marks are always going to be wrong. And so that's why I don't necessarily emphasize them, though for the sake of teaching, I'm going to. I can knock in the sort of neckline, which lands about halfway between here and here. So I know that that's going to be the pit of the neck. Then the next thing I'm going to do is knock in the center line. Okay. And then I'm going to knock in roughly where the point of balance is going to go. And it's going to go right there. So the foot's going to end there. So I have this is going to be where my pubic bone is. This is one head. And so this division is one head, another head. This is two heads, two heads, two heads. And I'm sort of regularizing this reference to what I'm seeing here. So next, I'm going to go in with the underpants. Boom. And this is kind of narrower. This figure is slightly turned, so I'm seeing the corner. So the underpants box is actually going to be, the full one is going to be something more like this. And I'm going to show a side. And then the leg is going to connect here. So the leg is going to come down here, and you'll see the glutes back here and so on. And so it's going to do this kind of thing. And then you'll see the corner kind of continue down like that, right? So what we're doing is basically starting with basic shapes and then converting to forms. So I'm going to do a basic shape kind of language first. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that side on there because I'm pretty sure that's about how big it's going to wind up being. Then I come up about here. The distance from the top of the iliac crest, which is about, say, here, to the rib cage is very, very small. So I know the rib cage is going to be about here-ish. And it's going to come up pretty high. It's going to be, because he's turning, I'm going to see less rib cage on this side than this side. And the rib cage kind of comes up and behind here. So I just want to make sure that the rib cage is reasonable and has a nice relationship here. Okay, so this is my rib cage shape. And if I can find the sternum, I'm going to go ahead and put the sternum in too. I'm going to do my little Star Trek communicator swoosh. Okay. Then for the legs, I'm going to do very, very simple. Just boom, this is your skyscraper shape. Then for the lower part of the leg, I'll do a little bit of a knee there. Just a little hint of a triangle. And then throw in my little diamond shape. Then the other leg's going back. I know the knee is about there. I'm going to draw a feint through. Finish it out. And I know that the foot's going to go somewhere there, like that. Then clavicles, boom, boom. Okay? Is this making sense? I hope it is. So, if you can't draw these shapes, simplify it down, right? The underpants shape should be pretty simple, but if you can't draw that, you can just draw a little box. This shape right here is pretty simple, but if you can't draw that, you can either draw like a full kind of eggy shape. You could even use another box, and that'll work, right? It doesn't matter necessarily what shapes you use in the beginning. It matters kind of how you develop them as you go along. So, and the way that you develop them is kind of the next stage, right? So, this stage is very important, this initial lay-in stage. The next stage is to kind of convert all this stuff to form. And then when you convert it to form, then you're going to tailor it to actually look like a figure, okay? So the one thing that I haven't done is I haven't connected this stuff, right? So I want to make a connection. And what I don't want to do is just kind of follow this contour perfectly. I want to be sure that I'm kind of including a little bit of information in there about the actual contour of this model. So I have the corner here, so I'm going to continue the corner up. Okay. And then I haven't put arms in, and arms are important. So I'm just going to go ahead and lay in those. Typically, the elbow lines up somewhere around the rib cage, so I can find that elbow really readily. A lot of times the wrist will hit around the pubic bone, so I can put a little tick mark there where the wrist is going to be, and then the hand is going to come down from there. And to lay in a hand, I usually do one line for the actual top of the hand, and then another line to express maybe where the fingers are going to go. I can put a little tick mark where the division is. And you know, I'm not going for a accurate life drawing. That's the other thing too. Like, everybody wants an accurate life drawing. What I think is more important is to, like, you know, study the model and learn about the anatomy and the figure, because you're gonna do like thousands of life drawings if you're really into this. And what I'd rather you figure out is how to analyze and, you know, put less weight on any one thing. So we can also practice this in zones too. Like, we can take one segment of the figure and practice that and figure that out, right? Rather than working on the whole figure. So are you guys, sound off in the channel, are you guys comfortable with these simple basic shapes? Because we're going to go from shape to form next. Okay, cool. Sounds like everybody's probably comfortable with this sort of shape language. Now remember, there's 7 basic forms, and you can go check the 7 basic form things out. Each form has a shape that's related to it. We're going to back up to some super basics here. So the 3 basic shapes are your rectangle, your circle, and your triangle. And every form has some kind of combination or adaptation of that. And you can start with one shape and you can make it different forms. For example, we're going to be using a lot of box forms. So you can take a rectangle and you can convert that into a box form, right? You can also take a rectangle and you can convert that into a cylinder, right? Even if you have this line going across, that just looks like the axis, right? You can take a rectangle and convert that into a prism, right? You can take this rectangle And if you change the proportions of it, it's kind of like, it sort of becomes triangular, right? So this rectangle, if I start changing the rectangle and doing things like this, it starts to look more and more triangular, right? Because I'm doing this. So what happens is that we use the triangle to indicate that the rectangle is going back in space. So we can cut that triangle off, and then we have a plane that's headed backwards, right? It's headed away from us. So that's kind of the function of the triangle. So the triangle is a super powerful thing, right? So we can think of rectangles as triangles and triangles as rectangles as well. So they have this intense relationship. But if you have a triangle, right, you can think of it as a cone going back in space potentially, right? Or you can think of it as a cylinder in perspective. So these are different little mental games and tricks that I like to play, right? And when you're drawing figures, you're going to use a lot of these three. The prism's great for the shin bone. You're going to see boxes and cylinders work all over the figure, especially for limbs and so on. The sphere is not as useful as a perfect sphere. The sphere has the problem in that you have to light it to make it look dimensional, but if you start making it more eggy, it starts to get more useful, because you can put the axis across it, and that could be a rib cage, or it could be, a head, right? And this could be where the eyes are. You could have a nose going and a mouth going out, right? So your forms are kind of where we're headed next. And the other thing that you need to be able to do eventually with figures is take forms and convert one form to another. So if you take your rectangle shape, on one side, this could be a box, and on the other side, it could be a cylinder. And if you give this some indication of this corner, right, start heavy and kind of fade, you've effectively just converted one to the other. And the other thing that you're going to be doing a lot of is taking this sort of rectangle, making it organic, potentially giving it a corner and converting it over here. So this sort of thing happens all the time in legs and arms, torsos, everything, right? And always draw this corner, and you've always got an organic sort of form. Okay, do you see how that works? So yeah, so proportions of the arms. Basically, we have it laid out here. You have some alignments. That's the main thing with the arms. The alignment for the elbow is right along the bottom of the rib cage, and then the wrists you'll find kind of align somewhere around the bottom of the pubic bone. And that's the main thing to keep in mind. The hand comes down about halfway down the leg, right, if they're stretched out. Okay? So that's the kind of, so this is where stuff's going to start getting really, really interesting. And we've already started to do this with this figure, is we've started to find this corner. So if I find this corner and I over-exaggerate this corner, right, I can express a little bit of the dimension of this figure up to where the arm connects here. And I can do simple shapes for the arms, right? I can do this totally flat. And it already starts to kind of look cool, even with simple shapes. As I start to enclose things and include overlapping shapes. Then all I have to do to start making this look dimensional is change the end of the shape. I can remember I'm just taking this rectangle and I'm changing the end of the shape, and that makes it a form. And then I give it a side, and that makes it like a super form. So I can change the shape of the leg. I can round it off here, round it off up there where it connects. I can probably round it off the other direction here because it's kind of changing. Then I can continue this side down in this sort of organic way. Then I come down to the knee. I can wrap, change the end, draw the corner, connect the corner, right? Around here, changing the end. I can just see the ankle, change the end. Then I can come into the arms. I can make that boxy, make this round, change the direction because the arm's changing direction slightly, come up to the top, change the direction, go over here, change the direction, round it off, round, and I'm seeing the side of the box here, so I'm going to leave that kind of flat. And then for the head, I'm just going to find this corner. I know that the eyes are going to go around here, so the corner is going to kind of come around here. So my face is somewhere over there that I'm trying to draw. Give an indication of the nose. You can find the jaw too, that'll help. Okay, so I found the corner there, I found the corner there. I just need to find the corner on the arms. And I'm doing this like really generically and really heavy. I'm showing you the trick, right? Everybody is really good at hiding the trick. Then what I can do is I can use some tone, some mass to kind of hide things a little bit. And I can show you that, hey, this is the side. Does that make sense? Okay, so basically all we're doing is very simple things. We're taking these things, and the form conversion has two parts, right? Part one is change end. And part two, after you do that, is find corner. Now, in most situations, this is where the light changes, and the light will indicate where the corner is. Okay? Then you get into practicing zones. Once you have this sort of proportional thing down, and it takes a little bit of practice, I'd say it probably, if you work on this for about a week, you can get it. And so I like to practice on 18 by 24 paper, and what I do is I go down the paper and I make two rows of 8-inch figures. So I'll take this, measure out 8 inches, and then I'll just draw lines all the way across at my marks, and then I don't have to keep redrawing that. I can just do the setup and then just go across, right? So yeah, we'll go into zone practice now and talk about how to make eyes parallel and all that stuff. Okay, I think there's problems that everybody runs into. I think the biggest one is that hexagon problem, right? That you only draw the outer bit, and you never get that inner corner. So if you imagine this hexagon as a head, right? That if I just leave it with this shape and I start like putting a nose in there, I start putting eyes in there, it's always going to look flat because what I've done is I've emphasized this outer contour. And anytime you emphasize the outer contour, it's going to look flat. You start emphasizing stuff on the inside, it's going to look dimensional. I take my hexagon, I give it a side, I emphasize this side really heavily, it looks more dimensional than that, right? Then I start building on eyes onto this, and a nose and everything. It starts to look like, you know, a robot head or like the old man from Up or something like that, right? So this is the essential problem that I find. The other one that I also see people do a lot with heads is they do this. They have that corner there, but then they show too much of one or both sides of the head. So they put the ear like way back here and the jaw kind of comes in and around, and you see the nose right here in the center, but then you see this entire eye over here and this entire eye over here, but it's supposed to be, you know, this head like that, and so the head kind of comes all the way back, and then you get this weird looking thing. This is way over exaggerated, right? But you kind of see this. It winds up being that you see that they're taking the head shape because they're using a reference, and rather than like making things go back in space, they've pulled both sides forward to kind of show more information about the head, right? And the most common one is to show too much of this bit right here, is to take the far side and show too much of the far side. So we're going to talk about that. I'm going to back up and get a head reference pulled up, and I'll show you what I mean. I think I imagine 3/4 is what everybody has trouble with, especially once you nail the 3/4 thing, then I think everything gets easier. And I go to actually the Reddit Gets Drawn subreddit for a lot of references, because they're just, you get like tons of regular people, you know, you don't have to draw models or anything like that, and you just troll through and sort of find some stuff. So remember the head, you know, whatever shape that you want to use is fine. You know, use this shape for the head, that's fine. The more sophisticated version is to do a 1, 2, 3 head and use 3 arcs, and the change of that arc will kind of tell you whether you're looking straight on at a head, the head's looking that way, the head could be looking that way. This helps you with the tilt too. Like if the head tilts down, this arc can go like that, this arc can go like that, and you can do that, and the head can be shown to be looking down. And then you can tailor this to the specific head shape. Alright, so we'll develop this one. So my first bit of tailoring is to change the jawline slightly, and then I'm going to work basically just big to small. So I'm going to divide that up. I'm going to make a guess at where that corner is going to go. And then right in about the middle, the head's tilted a little, so I'm going to put a guess at the eye line right there. So my face is going to kind of go there. I know that if I put a line straight down the center, right here, then I'm going to show too much of this far side. When I draw a plane in perspective, and I use my X method to subdivide, if I put a mark exactly mathematically halfway between, the center of the plane would be right here, right? But in perspective, the center is actually way back here, right? So I know that this side is big, and this side right here is small. So when I subdivide this head, I'm going to go, well, I know where the mathematical center, they're even. I know that my actual center is probably going to be like right here, right? So I have a small side and a big side. Okay, that is basically how you like make sure that you avoid this problem right here. Okay, make sure you're using small and large, and let's keep that simple concept in your head. Let's see, the circle triangle combo versus hexagon squares. Whatever head construction method works for you is fine to do the generic. I like this one a lot. It's a new one that I've encountered. There's also the illustrator method where you draw a circle and you divide the circle, and then you add half of the circle down and divide that, and then your eyes are going to go right here. Your nose hits here. Your mouth hits just above there. Your chin's here, and then you can like tailor the jaw shape. So this one works pretty well too. So if this method seems good for you, then use that. I like this one because it quickly defines the side of the head, and it allows me to construct the angles a little bit better. Let's see. The box method I think is really good for composition, right? Like if you're doing multiple figures and you're just trying to figure out inside a format like how figures are positioned and you're just making it up, just like a box is fine because it's super simple. But this is also simple as well. Probably even more simple. And I think whatever's simplest for you and makes sense for you is the way to go, right? Yeah. No, I mean I'm having fun doing this, and I appreciate you guys like taking the time to watch this stuff for sure. And I finally just launched a Patreon. There should be a link in the description too, and if you want to like join in on that, I'm working pretty hard to kind of like make some cool stuff for that. The next thing I'm going to do with this head is on this eye line, I'm just going to like probably indicate where the eyes are going to go, right? Just like any kind of indication. This works, top of the eye, like you could use dots for the pupil, right? Just kind of indicate where the eye is going to go. Give yourself a target, right? I can adjust from here. And then I'm going to come down, and this guy's got kind of a largish nose, but I'm going to put a tick mark at the bottom of the nose, and then I'll give myself a little target about where the mouth might go. And then I've kind of like decided basically where the features are. The next thing I can do is work into the next smallest form. So this is dividing the face is a big form, right? So I've gone from basically my one-sided box like this, right? Imagine this is like sort of the hexagon problem. So I have one side, I do that, now I have two sides, right? And I've tailored this to make it look sort of head-like. Okay? So now I can subdivide into smaller forms. And I think my next one is kind of the bottom of the head right here. Okay? So what I want to do is come to this far side of the eye and kind of find the form of the head here. And so I'm chunking this out, right? And I'm going to include the jaw in this form, right? And I think what happens with a lot of people is they'll develop one side of the face and not the other. So I think ignoring the nose first allows you to get these eyes like straight across from each other, right? Especially on an angle. And next form I want to attack is sort of the top of the head, right? I want to get this part ready. So I'm going to go from that center, and I can do a couple of smaller subforms, but I'm not. I'm just going to go straight for all the way up to the hairline and find that. Come back around. Okay. And I'm going to find the ear too. Ear's a good outer contour landmark. Okay. Then what I need to do is find the bone ridge above the eyebrow. The eyebrow is going to come in right here, right? But I want to find that bone ridge first, because this is kind of what defines some of the shadow of the head, right? Now I can use the eyebrow to define this form right here, right? Because what's happening with the eyebrow is that I'm taking this kind of like wedge form right here for the eyebrow, and I'm sticking eyes in it, right? So this is kind of like a little wedge form under the eyebrow. And the eyes are going to go in there. And then I'm going to stick a nose on it too and interrupt that form, right? It's kind of silly when you think about it. Okay, so now the nose, right? The nose, I know that that is basically sort of a box form. Like if I look straight up at somebody's nose, like into their nostrils, the shape of the nose is kind of like this. And then when I turn that up, I can see the nose having a shape kind of like this. Nostril, nostril, right? And then it's got two sides over there. If you like Cowboy Bebop, what they did with a lot of the characters was they gave them a nose, and then they would draw this side of the nose so that they could get a lot of the dimension and turn the forms really easily. And all they had to do is add these two lines, and they've got a really dimensional nose. So I would highly recommend doing that with all of your figures, right? I'm going to go in with the nose, and I'm going to think about, I want to get this plane established right here. And to do that, I have to draw both sides. So I'm going to draw both sides. Okay. And now I'm going to establish this plane right here. And that plane is going to help me establish the nostril. Okay? And then this guy's got a slight smile, right? So I can make a goofy little smile on there, right? Then I can work into smaller and smaller forms. So I've subdivided this into like 1, 2, 3 forms. So I come down and I can subdivide further. I like to go around from the nostril all the way down here, right, to the edge of the chin. And I go on both sides. And if I do that, this kind of helps me establish this outer contour right here, right? I'm treating this all as one big form. Then I can subdivide that further. I can go under the chin, or under the lip at the top of the chin, and I can make a form that kind of goes around the mouth, right? This guy is kind of smiling, so it gets a little bit of an S-curve and comes down. Boom. Okay? Kind of looks like weird clown makeup, but it kind of works. And I'm over-exaggerating to show you the trick. When you do this, you're going to do it more subtly and softer and build up a little more slowly, right? I'm going to come back to the eyes, right? I need to build out the eye itself. I'm going to start kind of large and work around it a little. So this is probably going to be more the skin around the eye. The eye is probably going to come in here. Give it an eye shape. Go below the eye, get some of the skin folds, go around it, get into the cheekbone. And what I do to one side, I have to do to the other, right? So one of the things you can think about too is saying, well, I can bounce from side to side, go one side, two side, and define the same form on both sides. Because ideally, like, a head symmetrical, right? Okay, he's kind of looking pretty silly, right? That's because we're over-exaggerating. So essentially, like, I've got the sort of head laid out, and the eyes are kind of across from each other, right? And if I zoom in, I can start showing you more stuff, like if I've got this guy's nose looking sort of generic, right? Got this boring generic nose. Got the plane sort of defined. I've got the nostril over here, right? I want to make this look like this guy's nose. So I have my structure laid down, and then I can use some lines to kind of tailor it. I think of it like tailoring clothing. I've got my generic layout, and then I want to make it specific to the person. So I can work on the pinch right here at the nose, and then he's got a little bit of this diamond shape on the top of the nose. And then at the bottom, the nose kind of comes out a lot. And what I'm doing is working side to side, right? So I get this pinch here, around, around, out, out. So I go around side to side. And then I've got a more tailored nose shape, right? Then you can see a little bit of the cartilage here. So I'm going to give this a side. And you can see just a bit of the underside. And the side of the nose comes back around, right? So it makes a more complicated, interesting nose shape. Then the nostril comes out around there. Comes in and connects. Then this is a soft arcing curve here, and it connects in. And so this bit I'm going to make really heavy because this is where the eye is going to come in. The eye is going to come in right over here. Boom. Okay? So this is kind of the tailoring process. That's the next kind of thing to work on. And this is, all we're doing is taking a really simple form, and then we're making it organic and following kind of the arcs of this particular person, right? And there's going to be a little bit of shadow under the nose. So when I start using mass, things are going to look really more interesting. When you do zone practice like this, you're always thinking about how is this going to connect, right? So that's why I drew in the eye over here. I'm thinking about how it's going to connect. The other eye's over here, right? How is that going to connect? What a break. So that's a good amount of stuff on heads. Are there more questions? Let's see here. Let's do something more with like a more dynamic pose, and just back up. I like to think of it as like the first 4 sort of marks as to how to begin this sort of thing, you know. I always like to do more than 4. Just get the head established, come down, get the neck established. Then I'm going to do a big arc to center. Then this pose has a leg coming forward, and then a leg going back. Okay, so I always draw softly too. If you're not drawing softly, then you're going to have trouble. So over-exaggerate. This is kind of the way that you begin. You're looking for these kinds of motions, right? And indicating these sorts of things. Your next stage is to then run into your kind of basic forms. And if you want to do if you only have like a minute or two and you want to do this really quickly, you can run your arc down, run your legs back, and then you can almost immediately just go ahead and do your forms if you're good at doing forms, and even get a side of the form in there. You can run your shape in. This is how a lot of people in the Renaissance drew, because they're either composing and working quickly and thinking quickly, or they were drawing people out in the world and they didn't have much time. So this is kind of a quick construction. If I do a quick construction like this, then I can come back later, get references, and change things. The accuracy doesn't matter as much because I can always go and get, get more information, get somebody to model, get somebody to take the pose for me later. So if you see something interesting like this, you can kind of quickly get that down. The other thing that you can do is do like a 2-color setup. So if you want to be able to see your initial marks, you can go in with 2 different colors. And this can help you kind of develop your figure. The seated model is basically the same thing. When somebody's sitting, and this is a really good question, is you can use the same proportional grid. And from the head to the pubic bone, it's going to be about the same. And then you're going to move the legs. So let me find a seated reference. That'll help. So if I have a seated model, right, and I'm practicing on all these rows, I can go head. And I can bring the proportions right over. Boom. They're sitting. The underpants right there. Ribcage shape right there. Then all I have to do is take the legs and shift them up. So I can do leg, 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 so all I do is shift it all up. And then I can go on top with the forms that I know how to draw, right? So I know this leg is going to come out here, and the knee is going to be right here. My calf is this diamond shape. And I'm going to have a foot attached. And I know that that other leg is going to be over here and coming under, right? There's going to be a little bit of overlap. So then I just want to emphasize the leg that's in front, right? Use that line weight to emphasize it, and that makes it come in front. So your seated figure is like basically the same thing. You're just varying the legs at the bottom. That's all. You know, you turn the seated figure, and it's basically the same thing, right? You got somebody sitting down. You've got their center line kind of pinched and crunched. Then you got their leg coming over this way, right? One leg coming down. Proportions just run the same right along the side. I got my rib cage over here. The pelvis right here, right? And all I have to do is like enclose the shapes a little bit, and it starts to look like, you know, a seated figure. Build the leg in front. And there you go. Yeah. What questions do you have next? We didn't talk about arm proportions very much. Arms aren't particularly difficult. I think the main difficulty is how they interact with the rib cage. So when you have a rib cage drawn in like this, right? We'll go back to here. You have its side, and you add in the clavicle. The clavicle is great because that kind of indicates to you where the shoulder is going to go and the ultimate width of the shoulder. When you practice these, you can actually leave like a little armhole on either side if you just want to eliminate the arms and understand what the torso is doing. But when you do want to add the arms, if that armhole is there, then adding the arms is really simple, right? Your arms are a cylinder. Remember, so we swing this arc back and around, and that's going to hit the elbow. So the elbow is going to go right there. At its very simplest, your arm can just be this cylinder, right? And that's going to work. Your forearm is going to be a little more cone-shaped, and remember, you swing the arc back from the pubic bone, and you get your wrist, right? So that's how you get the arm like the right length, right? And your hand comes off of that, about the middle. The fingers are going to end like at the middle of the leg. So you swing that arc back, and you get that. Eventually, you'll just kind of develop the instinct for where that is. And then you can kind of tailor, right? Say, this is the deltoid, tricep, and so on, right? It's kind of sticking out. This is the side of the figure, and so on. Okay. Hands and feet. Yes, those are always the most difficult thing. I'm gonna give you basically like the simple hand and the simple foot, okay? From a couple of different angles. I think I've got some pretty decent like references we can pull from. So there's some tricks that you can pull out of like Renaissance drawing for hands and feet that and some specific lines. Yeah, so we can do them on this page real quick. So simple foot. So let's say you're looking at a foot directly on the side. I like uh, this sort of line right here to establish where the foot is, because that tells me where the heel is, the arch is, and the ball of the foot, and where the toe probably ends. I can then make some tick marks and cut that off. So I'll draw that bigger. Okay, so heel, boom, ba. So a little like S-curvy arc thing. Heel, right? The ankle is going to go somewhere here. So if you want this to be super simple, you can also go flat, boom, 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 boom. Memorize this shape. You can even subdivide it, right? Ankle is going to go there. You can add toes. Okay, remember, so this is like, you can use this simple shape and then tailor, or you can go more towards the tailored shape. And then always practice the connection, right? Where is that going to connect from there? Okay, one of the things that a lot of Renaissance artists did is they would go all the way from the calf down to the ankle, continue that line up and down into the foot, right? So this is one that if you're kind of more confident about it, this line right here comes right out of the Renaissance. And that line, a lot of people use that line and they turn that when the foot's forward to you. Okay, so this is kind of like the inside of the foot, right? Outside of the foot, you can do the same shape. It's basically just like drawing a shoe. You can cut off the toe, right? And you can run toes back. Okay, so your pinky toe, you can overlap them. And there you go. You have like your series of toes running back in space. Then you have this like fleshy kind of corner here and your heel. So you can draw this little corner in. You'll see that on a lot of feet as well. And your ankle comes in too. Kind of spreads out. So let's see. Say the foot's like in a more dynamic position going down, right? A lot of times you'll see the foot do this thing and the toes will bend, right? So you'll see the foot do some crazier shapes. So segment it out, right? Think of it flat, right? So toes go this way, foot goes this way, right? Add a heel. You can also think of it as a two-part foot, right? So if the foot's coming forward, you can say, well, the foot's coming forward with this sort of shape, the toes are right there, and then I can see the heel back there, and then the ankle's there. So that works too. So anything simple, I think, is where you want to go with the feet, right? If you're looking at the back of the foot, you'll see the heel come in, kind of like this. Simplify it down. You can transition with arcs if you want. Then you're going to see ankle. One's higher than the other, right? One's low. One's high. And then, since this is going to be the inside of the ankle because it's high, I'll see a little bit of the foot over there, right? So you can think of these like simple overlaps, simple shapes. Cool. Yeah, hands, you can think of them as a little bit boxy, right? So hand, then your fingers, I would say group together 3 fingers. They'll be boxy like that. Then you can throw your pinky off because your pinky kind of does its own thing. And then your thumb's going to come out over on the other side. and it's going to do its own thing. Right? So your thumb gets established over here. Boom. Okay. So generic shape, kind of like that, right? Pinky, thumb. So even simpler, right? You can eliminate the thumb, and just to establish the hand, you can go boom, boom, boom. A lot of this depends on scale. Like if you have the room to do this sort of thing, that's great. If you're drawing really small, use something simpler, right? Because essentially it's just like a flipper, right? Look at it, it's just, that's all it really does. You know, you separate out towards that, and you can do more with the flipper. You can make it curve and so on. So that's hands. If you look at the palm, if you flip it, right, you have, boom, you have this segment. Your thumb kind of comes out this way. Then your fingers kind of come out. So this is kind of like your mitten hand, right? Put the pad in the pad of the thumb, and you connect it. Okay. So that's simple hands, simple feet. The dynamic pose thing just comes with experience, right? And drawing a fairly large amount. I think, and the energy comes from whether you can carry that energy through to the forms, right? So this is going to be our last topic, and we'll cut it off from here. So let's say that I have this figure that's standing and has this huge arc to the figure, right? And their legs coming down, and they've got like this crazy pose like this, and their heads kind of thrown back, and they're looking up like this. Arms coming back this way, so on, right? This is a huge, crazy gesture line that could be really, really tough to draw. What everybody wants to do is regularize and make these things straighten out, right? Because if I look at the actual model, like the gesture of it's really doing this and kind of coming down, right? And so this is more accurate, right, in terms of the way the torso is going, but this has more energy. So just go with what has more energy. And then when you convert this to the form, right, you're just going to go kind of your generic form, small side, big side, and you just want to carry that arc through this basic form. And that's going to help you establish this and keep this going, right? Then you're going to put the underpants line in and build this form out from there, right? So this arm is really reaching, right? And it's going to kind of start here with the deltoid and kind of just reach forward and stretch, stretch, stretch. And so you want to carry these flowing arcs through that. And so the trick to this is to continue the dynamism through the second stage when you establish the forms, right? And to think in terms of like, you know, this form coming out and preserving that angle. If I start to straighten that angle and not pay attention to what I did in that beginning, then it's going to regularize things and it's going to get more boring. You know, getting stills of people dancing and maybe people like fighting and doing martial arts is probably like the best way. So, you know, in actuality, what's happening now is the leg on the model is actually going this way. So I'm exaggerating that and making it go this way. Again, simple foot, right? connect the ankle, find that, draw that out. Is this answering your question? Yeah. So do I use a collection of references to practice the construction of parts? Definitely references. Yeah. Um, it's very hard to do this without reference. And the reality is, if you see people making this up generically, it's because they have memorized references and memorized generic shapes, and they're able to tailor them and make them look less generic. So whether someone's working from a reference or from their head, there's always a model in their head too. And I mean, that's like the biggest thing is, people ask about how do you make this stuff up. It's like, well, yeah, you can probably make this up right here, like with a little bit of practice, no problem. But then, um, like, go get a reference for it for the difficult parts, like, knowing exactly, the shape of the rib cage here and where the light hits. That's really complex, and there's no reason that you should be beating yourself up not being able to make it look good from your head. You just want to go and get a reference and, make things, and, use the reference to tailor to kind of what you want. Um, so I think we'll have to kind of end there. If you enjoyed this, please consider going to the Patreon page. It's patreon.com/MeadMcLean. I've come up with some like basic like little reward tiers that I kind of come from like the request that a lot of people have. Basically assignments, reference packs, useful quick guides. I'll like send me an image and I'll draw over it. We'll do like more exclusive chats with like Google Hangouts, so you can actually get on a webcam or a mic and ask me questions directly, and we'll record those just for those people. And then if you just want like a demo page or a demo sketch, and there's a reward tier for that too. So uh, yeah, I appreciate you guys' time and everything, and I'll trim this down and edit it, and it'll be available later.